Hello, and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. This is not normal live programming. We are not going to be doing a live chat with this one. This is not going to be 2 hours long. This is basically a brief update on what has happened with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Essentially, Azerbaijan has won. It is a very strange thing. In the 21st century, and it is a very good thing that it is a very strange thing to describe, to be in a situation where we have a outright military victory of one state against another state. As I've been saying since I started talking about this conflict, this is the third video in this series. I sort of opened the war with a quick live update, and I think I'm now closing the war with a quick live update. As I've said since the beginning, what's particularly horrible about this is that this is a state-on-state war. The potential for a catastrophe, for horror, is much higher than in most of the other conflicts that we see, which are usually some version of a foreign invader dealing with a local insurgency or a civil war of some sort. This is two full-on state militaries with all of the capacity for death dealing, focusing on not just enemy soldiers, but enemy civilians. Over the past, I believe it's 44, 45 days, those predictions have been borne out, thankfully with not as much loss of life as I thought. But there is a result here. After a quarter century of diplomatic failure, Azerbaijan attacked Armenia and won. That is what's pretty clear with the negotiated agreement that has been released to some extent by the Russian, Armenian, and Azerbaijani governments. I'm going to assume, for the purposes of this brief presentation, that you're somewhat aware with the facts of the conflict, but very briefly, in 1994, a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, two post-Soviet republics that used to be part of the USSR. It is a conflict that had started in 1988 with reciprocal atrocities. Populations that had lived together largely peacefully during the course of the Soviet Union went to war with each other. In 1994, Armenia won. And because of that, they took control. Not legal control. This is a key thing. They never had legal control. This land that was being fought over was always technically Azerbaijan. They had de facto control of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, which was majority Armenian, had been for most of the Soviet time, though there were, of course, Azeris that were ethnically cleansed out of there in the 90s. So they took that, which most of the international community still believes today deserves some kind of autonomy, but they also took a number of provinces around Nagorno-Karabakh that they maintained an occupation in for 25 years. In 1994, Armenia was the richer, more powerful country. Despite always being a smaller country than Azerbaijan, they were comfortably supported by their diaspora. I think many would argue this, but it's arguable that they had better relations with the Russian sort of hegemon that was in the process of leaving the region and is now very much back. So in 1994, Armenia won. What has not been acknowledged, was not acknowledged by Armenian leadership, is just how seriously their advantage eroded since 1994. Azerbaijan became a progressively more and more wealthy petrostate and built up its military more and more. There were principles, suggestions, quarter century worth of diplomatic suggestions, processes, proposals that had gone back and forth. The new government in Armenia in 2018, tragically, was both more democratic and more honest about what Armenia's intentions were, which ended any possibility of diplomacy. It's quite tragic what's happened to Armenia here. Basically, the diplomatic proposals that Armenia resisted for 25 years, proposals that it seems likely Azerbaijan would have been willing to accept, to some degree. I mean, obviously it's diplomacy. One never knows what the agreements would have been. But the military facts on the ground that Azerbaijan has established over the past 45 days are much more severe than the diplomatic options that were available to 25 years worth of 25 years worth of Armenian governments. So what we're seeing here is a phased return of all occupied territories outside of Nagorno-Karabakh over the next month. This is not a phased return over years. This is something that is intended to happen immediately. Something that both Armenia and Azerbaijan wanted to avoid for quite some time is going to happen. There are now, I believe, already Russian peacekeeping troops on the ground in this Armenian enclave in Nagorno-Karabakh. Those Russian peacekeepers are going to be enforcing the absolutely not independence or even really autonomy, but the ongoing life and security of the Armenian folks in that small Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. Crucially, not even in the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave as it existed before this fighting. Crucial parts, including the city of Shusha or Shushi, depending on which side you're on, have been taken by the Azerbaijanis, and they will stay with the Azerbaijan government. So yeah, there is now a Russia-enforced sort of peacekeeping zone, a 5-kilometer corridor that goes to Armenia, and I mean, essentially the city of Stepankert and a few other towns and villages, and a much smaller Nagorno-Karabakh enclave is now safe. That seems to be the case if the elements of the Armenian military can all be convinced to accept this. So this is basically worse than the Madrid principles. What's crucial is that 5-kilometer corridor between the Armenian enclave that survives in Azerbaijan and Armenia itself now seems to be, this is very unclear. Folks really don't understand what this means, but it seems as though Armenia has also committed to allowing some kind of transit in between Azerbaijan and the Nakhchivan enclave, which is a part of Azerbaijan that has been geographically separated by Armenia from the main body of Azerbaijan. So the fact that this corridor exists now is very disputed. We don't know what it means. I think it's most probably going to be run by Russian customs officials. But again, this is pretty bad for Armenia. Every element of this is bad for Armenia. I think even for Azerbaijan, it's got to be a little weird that Russian troops are now going to be on their territory policing this Armenian enclave within Azerbaijan. However, I think, as I'll get to, I think it actually is very, very, very good for Azerbaijan and helps handle what I saw as the greatest threat and peril of this conflict to Azerbaijan and even Turkey. So even though I think Azerbaijan would not traditionally want to have Russian troops back on their territory after they had left at the end of the Soviet Union, I think it actually operates to Azerbaijan's great benefit. Armenia has been just crushed. It is a grim prospect. The only positive that I see here is that a week ago, I was getting seriously concerned as news had come out that probably the most, what sounds like, from my limited knowledge, I'm not an expert on this area, but what sounds like, to my limited knowledge, one of the more strategically important cities within the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenian enclave had fallen. It seemed to me like we might actually be about to see a large-scale ethnic cleansing. That is not going to happen. Because the Russians are now there. They are not going to allow a new sort of genocide happen here. And that is a positive for Armenia, but that is not much of a positive considering what was promised here. For Azerbaijan, I suppose, though I think the principle established here is tremendously dangerous to the world community in general. This idea that we can settle an issue militarily, though I think that's dangerous. I think Azerbaijan has done it and is, I suppose, to some degree to be congratulated. It is important to emphasize that while there were 150,000 Armenian lives on the line here, there were 600 to 800,000. I mean, I've seen estimates of no estimate. I've seen no estimate lower than 400,000. You know, the New York Times have estimates between 600,000 and 800,000. Azerbaijanis were ethnically cleansed in the 1990s from this area, and they are now going to be able to go home. And that is unfortunately a product of military destruction and great suffering on both sides. But that is, I think, something worth celebrating. These, obviously, I can see that no Armenian would be willing to do that. You may be understanding now why there is no live chat to this video. I think it would involve just a little too much negativity. So Azerbaijan has won, and this is key in my sort of only produced video on this conflict. Azerbaijan is not Turkey. I think one of the biggest dangers for Azerbaijan, because of their relative strength and the fact that they were backed by Turkey, the perpetrators of the 1915 genocide, or rather the descendants of the perpetrators. I'm very glad I don't have a live chat here. I would have gotten a lot of angry comments from Turks. The great danger here for Azerbaijan was to be seen as the continuers of that genocide. And by allowing Russia on their territory, which is a bit of a sacrifice, they have neatly avoided that entire problem. The Azerbaijanis have not only won, they have managed to win without the horrific images of dead Armenian families or Armenian, old Armenian men and women, walking back to Armenia from Stepanakert or the shelling of Stepanakert. That was what I thought this war could end with. And while it's certainly a tremendous victory for Armenia, those I think actually many civilians have already left Nagorno-Karabakh, and now actually some may be able to return, which is quite extraordinary. That's a victory to a degree for Armenia and Pashinyan, but I also believe that's a huge victory for Azerbaijan, that they are not going to win this conflict, which they have, with those reputation-killing visuals of ethnic cleansing and genocide and horror. So yeah, I think Azerbaijan has won. I think there's a lot of sort of on Twitter, I see a lot of people saying, well, okay, well, now what we've got here is just a complete reverse of what we had in 1994, where the Armenians were on top, and if they had just managed it better, maybe it would have worked out. Now it's the Azerbaijanis are in the superficially better position, but they're really in a risky position now that they have to worry about, and I don't think that's true, frankly. I don't think there's a lot of leeway for Armenia to sort of jump back and make it more and make things worse for Azerbaijan again. I think Azerbaijan really has won here, and I think that's pretty key, actually, because if there were an ongoing danger for Azerbaijan here, then they'd be more brutal, then they'd be more genocidal, more problematic. So I think actually we do have a real possibility for this to end. I'm very conscious that no Armenians want to hear that right now, but it's hard to see how Armenia comes back from this, especially once Azerbaijan repopulates those areas. I mean, these are hundreds of thousands, under anybody's numbers, hundreds of thousands of people who were put away from their homes 25 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, who can now come back. And if those people do come back, there's really no scope for Armenia to come back and do the sorts of ethnic cleansings they did in the 1990s. It's indefensible, especially because their enclave has been preserved to a degree. So yeah, I think this isn't just a reverse of 1994. This doesn't just bring us to a new level of tensions or whatever this, I mean, it could, and to be very clear, this could all end in disaster very quickly. There's potential for falling apart of the deal. There's potential for the Armenian government disintegrating, that we saw very, very scary intimations of last night. That's a very real possibility, but this could be the end. And as an outside observer, obviously, it would be impossible to say this as an Armenian. The tragedy, the pain they must be feeling right now must be horrific. But as an outside observer, like, this is possibly resolved, though obviously in the worst way possible. War is always a disaster, and especially this sort of state-on-state war is something quite horrifying. And as happy as the Azerbaijanis may be today, I think they should consider that they are in a region that is surrounded by three powers that are much more powerful than they are. Maybe not Iran, but Russia and Turkey. And the Azerbaijanis have just proven that aggressive war is a good way to get your way. That is not a great thing to prove in a neighborhood when you are vastly smaller than your neighbors. So anyway, but yes, Azerbaijan has won. For Armenia, I mean, this is truly, truly tragic. And I talked about this on a private live stream previously, but the incredible tragedy of what's happened to Armenia here is, I think, personified by the Prime Minister. God, I believe it's the Prime Minister, not the President, Nikol Pashinyan. This guy came to power in 2018 in a wave of positivity, a democratic movement. I'm sure some would argue, and I'm sure to some degree, his democratic bona fides are oversold or what have you. Politics is always difficult, especially in a place like Armenia, that is so embattled, so impoverished, so dependent on outside actors, be they, France, the United States, Russia, or just the Armenian diaspora itself. Tremendously difficult job that Nikol Pashinyan set himself. The government of Armenia, from its independence from the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, I don't know the exact date, or perhaps late 80s, until Pashinyan came to power in 2018, was the government of sort of standard strongman dictatorship, the kind of government that Azerbaijan has. Actually, not quite as bad as the government that Azerbaijan has. There was more of a back and forth between oligarchies, but it was a deeply corrupt, deeply screwed up place. And Pashinyan came to power to bring democracy and an improvement. And I think that many still believe that he did so. Unfortunately, that democracy, that responsiveness to the will of the people, meant that unlike his predecessors in Armenian leadership, he actually had to be a little more honest about what the Armenian people thought they were going to get from Nagorno-Karabakh. So this incredibly tenuous position where Armenia had won this victory in 1994, and had just sort of basically managed to hold on to it by staving off any diplomatic resolution for the following decades, was only possible when Armenia was run by a strong man who could sort of say, sure, okay, who could sort of ignore the people and lie to Azerbaijan and say, oh yeah, we're really amenable to a diplomatic solution here. Pashinyan, who was more democratic, he had to be honest. He had to say, and as he did, that Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia. While his government did not go so far as to recognize the independence of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, or actively try to annex it, it was clear through his statements that reflected the democratic will of the Armenian people, that the diplomatic process was over. While I always condemn military aggression, you can sort of see why Azerbaijan took this step, and they only took this step because Armenia made a concerted effort to become a more democratic country. It is a true tragedy in sort of the sense of Greek tragedy, and it is. I think it is quite possible that Nikol Pashinyan will lose his job for this, and might in fact lose his life. I don't know. It looked pretty grim. I saw a lot of footage from I think it's Neil Hauer on Twitter, who had a lot of footage of folks invading Armenia, very angry folks on the streets of Yerevan, Armenia's capital, invading the Armenian parliament. I think more last night than this morning, I saw a lot of indications that Pashinyan and the Armenian government could have been losing control of their military. That's still very much a possibility. I can't see any positive reaction from that. Apparently, I also saw there's also indications from the leader of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave. Armenians call it the Republic of Artsakh. Indications from that leader that yes, they had lost. They had lost the battle for Shusha or Shushi, the incredibly strategically important town on the heights within that enclave. They had no choice but to make this deal. So if there are elements of the Armenian military or the sort of Artsakh, enclave that managed to defy Pashinyan on this, I don't see what would happen other than more loss of life and just general loss for Armenians. But I think it's very likely that Pashinyan will not politically survive this incredible failure and loss. And I think that, I hope that he physically survives. I would be very surprised if he politically survives. It's a serious question whether Armenia's democratic revolution is going to continue. Because that democratic revolution, of course, was sort of contingent, or at least they had the thought that, hey, this is going to mean we're going to get more support from the West, right? We're going to get more support from the EU, from NATO, from the United States. In their time of greatest need, they clearly did not get that. I do have to say that I think there's some sort of fundamental illogic here in the way that the Armenian cause is commonly described in the United States. I think it's very easy to say, oh, there was a genocide here. This is just 1915 all over again. To do that, and I think the reason why perhaps Armenian nationalists in the US haven't gotten as much support for the cause as perhaps they had hoped, is that when you look into the details, it's like, well, actually, yes, there are definitely some echoes of 1915 here that are very important, but there's also what Armenia did to people who are still very much alive and around in the 1990s. So there's this sort of more give and take here. However, even knowing that, I think we can all appreciate what a tragedy this must be for Armenia today. It is not another reason why I do not have live chat on this video. As far as the world in general, another thing that I've sort of seen is this sort of blaming Trump. This is. But to be clear, for those who are new here, I am very much a Trump opponent. I'm very happy that Biden has won. I think that fucker Trump needs to acknowledge what has happened, et cetera, et cetera. However, I think it's a very easy answer for a lot of people to say, oh, Trump distracted us. If it wasn't for Trump, this horrible thing would never have happened. Da, 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 da. I think it's possible that, like, in a sort of very limited sense, the general inattention that Trump brought was a part of this. But I think that the inattention, the lack of attention paid to Nagorno-Karabakh, to the issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan, is not a Trump thing. It's obviously worse under Trump, as everything is worse under Trump. But for 25 years, the United States, along with, I've forgotten the other countries in the Minsk process, I assume France and Russia, and perhaps a few others, the United States, in its munificent liberal international order, promised to provide a diplomatic solution to this frozen conflict, and did nothing. So there's I've seen a lot of this, like, oh, this is what you get when you're not paying attention, and it's like, no, because this conflict existed and was there and was real for 25 years. And the US State Department, under nominally much more accomplished folks like Bill Clinton and, well, not Bush, and Barack Obama didn't do anything to solve this issue either. I think it's you can sell that, you know, maybe the resolution wouldn't have been this immediate and violent if Trump wasn't president, but I'm not even entirely sure that that's no. I'm entirely sure that war and violence is bad, but I don't think this would have benefited. I don't think anyone would have benefited from more U.S. involvement. This is a neighborhood that is between Iran, Turkey, and Russia. There are plenty of regional powers that are able to sort of stick their thumb on the scales here. The U.S. had no reason, has no reason to be there other than to create a larger war. The main thing that I want to take away from this is diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. If you do want something to blame Trump for, it is the evisceration of the State Department. This is something that had been occurring before Trump. This is very much a sort of war on terror, post 9/11 story, or maybe even post Cold War story. But it has gotten dramatically worse under Trump. It is now the State Department under Mike Pompeo has become sort of a joke, a sort of a branch of Breitbart, or not even a branch of Fox News, a branch of Breitbart or One America News Network or some other scurrilous right-wing political news outfit. So the fact that diplomacy has been so de-emphasized and so thrown down over the past decades is the reason we have this tragedy for Armenia, is the reason that we arrived at a solution that diplomacy should have arrived at, frankly, 20 years ago, though it would have been better for the Armenians under diplomacy than this. You know, the fact that we've gotten thousands, you know, the estimates are what, five to 10,000 people died, and Armenia and Azerbaijan are tiny, tiny countries. So 5 to 10,000 people dying in those countries is like, you know, if Syria had been 2 million. Okay, ignore that math, please. The perils of live broadcasting. But this is horrific, what has happened. And the result is one that diplomacy would have arrived at, a sensible diplomatic focus would have arrived at, frankly, 10, 15 years ago. Except it would have been better for the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, not just because thousands wouldn't have died, but also because they probably would have had more territory. So I think we talk about frozen conflicts, about these conflicts that these conflicts that are just sort of there and they're just a problem. I mean, North Korea would be a good example, the sort of North Korea and South Korea. Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, Transnistria in Moldova. And now, of course, we've got a whole new range of Russo-Turkish frozen conflicts in Syria and Libya. All of these things have the potential to do what Nagorno-Karabakh has just done to us, to just sort of ambush the world and humanity with mass death, slaughter, horror, and death for, you know, no purpose, especially when diplomacy could have resolved these issues. So I would hope that the lesson that we take from this horror is that we need to reemphasize diplomacy, not in some like, oh, U.S. needs to be the leader again. No, like everybody needs to focus more on diplomacy around these conflicts, because the alternative is what we've seen over the past 45 days, which has been horrifying. And condolences to the many grieving families of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Let's never do something like this ever again.